Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Her Faith Inspires podcasts. Today I have two guests on the show where we're going to be talking about a topic that I don't even have a lot of experience on, and that's why you get the experts to come in and discuss these issues with technology, AI. Where is it going? Where are we at with it? And how do we navigate it as Christians? Do we look at it as something that we need to refrain from, or do we look at it as a tool that we can utilize to help share the gospel, disciple other people? Well, we're going to talk about all of that and more today. And I hope that you guys will be more equipped and more knowledgeable once we hit end on this podcast. So I have two guests, like I said. I have Josh and Annie, and they're going to go ahead and tell us about who they are and what they do. And Josh is actually one of the writers of this book, and Josh Pauling and Annie Crawford, just so you guys know their names, and I'll tell you how to link up with them at the end. But I want to know why. Sometimes I'm like, why did you write the book? What made you want to write the book? And what was the inspiration behind the book? So anyways, I'm going to bring them on. Josh, we'll go ahead and start with you. And then Annie, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the deep on all of the questions. So welcome to both of you to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation. I like what you're doing, and just really happy to be here today. So yeah, my name's Josh Pauling, and I do a bunch of things. For a while, I was a high school history teacher and coach for 13 years in the public schools. And just during that time, I was really interested in researching sort of technology and education and the way those two things intersect. I was teaching really from the early 2000s up until 2021 in the sort of a large school environment. And so during that era, we're going through all sorts of technological changes, right? That's when the smartphone emerges and all sorts of things. And so I was sort of on the front lines, seeing how this was affecting high schoolers especially. And so that's been a big interest of mine. I also, I'm a vicar at All Saints Lutheran Church. It's basically an assistant to the pastor. I'm going through seminary to become a pastor. I also have some education. I went to Messiah College, and then I went to Winthrop University to get a master's degree in teaching. I've also done some study at Reformed Theological Seminary, and now going to Concordia Theological Seminary. Let's see what else I do. I also make custom furniture. I run a little business making custom furniture. And then I do a lot of writing. I'm a contributing editor for Salvo magazine. I also do some writing for Modern Reformation and Touchstone and Public Discourse, a whole variety of different groups. And the book we're going to be talking about today is Are We All Cyborgs Now? This is a book that I wrote with Robin Phillips. And really looking forward to discussing it today with you two. And we wanted to bring Annie in on the conversation. A lot of her work really intersects with the topics that are in the book. And so really wanted to get her perspective as well. She's been involved at various points with the book. She's a friend of my co-author, Robin Phillips. And so welcome, Annie, as well.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Shonda, and thanks, Josh. I'm real excited to have this conversation with y'all. So I'm a classical educator, cultural apologist, and Lewis scholar. And to kind of pull those threads together, I'll start with homeschooling my own kids. I'm a homeschooling mom who, as a young mom, 24 years old, trying to figure out how do I raise my children to be faithful followers of Christ in a world that is increasingly interesting. So I started homeschooling my daughters in the classical education tradition, learning with them along the way. And as I was learning by educating my own kids, seeing the greater need in the community. So I co-founded a classical co-op community here in Austin where we could provide educational resources to other families. That's where I teach great books and apologetics courses, seeing the need in the church for worldview resources, apologetic resources. So started doing some teaching within our church, seeing a broader need, to communicate. So started writing for places like Salvo, written there, Symbolic World, Unexpected Journal, a journal of cultural apologetics that I helped start. It's really just as in trying to raise my own kids. Yeah. And trying to meet their needs, trying to share what I was able to find along the way through teaching, through writing, through speaking. And then in terms of C.S. Lewis, I really found his work to be a kind of anchor for all the things that I was feeling the need to address, apologetics, giving reasons for why we believe, helping people see why Christianity is true. Well, C.S. Lewis, one of the great apologists of the 20th century. But then beyond just rational apologetics, realizing that we humans are not just thinking rational creatures, we're embodied creatures, we're desiring creatures, and this need to communicate Christian truth at the cultural level, the level of story, the level of imagination, and which C.S. Lewis also did by writing stories and using powerful analogies. And then Lewis also is an anchor in that, why was he able to do this so well? Why was he able to communicate truth so well? Why was he able to address some of the cultural issues that we're facing through his fiction and nonfiction? He was classically educated. He was deeply rooted in the great books, in the classical philosophy, in the great stories of the tradition. And so I found that, focusing on C.S. Lewis in my work really provides an anchor for all these various topics and a model for how to communicate so effectively. Lewis is just a master of communicating. I was listening to one of your podcasts, Sean, and you talked about how it was Lewis who said, when you really understand something, you can communicate it to the 6-year-old, right? So Lewis, as a resource and a model for how do we address for ourselves and our children, the cultural challenges that are before us. And then to our topic today, first, and foremost among those, how do we deal with this increasingly digital world? How do we understand the meaning of technology? Does Scripture have anything to say about technology? And so seeing that pressing need, I developed a media ecology course for high schoolers, which is my connection to this topic for about 10 years, just really deeply thinking on how do we equip our kids and ourselves to understand technology so that we can have good boundaries, and that those boundaries with technology don't just seem arbitrary, like rules, like, don't do social media, but we really understand how it works, how it shapes us, so we can make informed and empowered good decisions about the way we live in our digital world. So sorry for kind of a long introduction, but just a description of kind of my work and how I came to this topic.
No, I love it. I love both. I think I connect with both of you because I have a public education background from California, getting my degree, my credential there. And Josh, like you, I feel like it was constantly bringing in, integrating that technology into the classroom. And then pretty soon it was almost like there was no more pen and paper. It's like we were doing testing on the iPads and the kids didn't always like it. They were like, how do I navigate the state testing with this, this iPad here, because they couldn't really flip the next page and see what was before and after as easily. And that was just one aspect of it. But also because they're kids that are technology natives, they also expected the technology we're thinking about how to make learning fun with the iPad. And in some ways it was convenient. And in other ways it was like, how far do I have to go with this, this lesson? But then there were some great aspects to it. I don't know if you had this, but we had, because I'm not in the public education system anymore, obviously, but the smart board would be, in front of the classroom, and I have my own iPad and I could walk around my classroom anywhere with my iPad and throw things to the smart board. I loved that because I could monitor my kids, look over their shoulder, and I could also shut down their iPads because I could see what they were looking at and if they were actually on task. So it was good, but then there were some things like that's just not also how the world operates. You're not going to do everything with technology. So I completely relate to that. And it's just keeping up with the speed of it. And then at the second time, Annie, I love that and I think that this is such an important message to parents overall, because if we see the lack, and I think a lot of Christians, let's just say whether you're a parent or not, I think a lot of Christians can look around and say, just like me, at some point we can be shaken up a little bit to see that the culture and the church just aren't really, obviously they're never going to be, add up and be in sync. We shouldn't expect that. But I think we should expect something from the church to equip us to handle the cultural messages or the challenges of the culture. And I think we don't feel equipped in the church to handle those. And so when we're trying to equip our kids, we say, oh my gosh, I need to know this. I need to learn this. And then you're able to expand on your own knowledge. That's how a lot of parents seem to be learning these days, especially parents who homeschool and who have that opportunity. And I'd say privilege as well. So I see those, both in both of you, I see such, really, I can relate to both experiences. And when you put those things together, they can make for a very powerful educational experience within the home and within the church, and just helping people, Christians, be aware of how we can navigate it as well. So I appreciate your backgrounds very much. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say,
yeah, go
Annie,
ahead,
one of
Josh.
the my favorite articles of yours is the one you wrote about Barbie, the Barbie movie. That was a great piece. It was awesome.
I have to read it. I'll have to read that, Annie. That was like last year, that was the talk of so many people, like coming out with Barbie or the Barbie movie, and how we should even think about that. So was that related to technology as well? Or was that just were you just talking? Oh, you know what? Was that out of Salvo's magazine, Annie?
Yeah.
I shared it. I read it. I shared it. And I think I even messaged, who did I message? Was it Terrell? I don't know. It blew me away. And I think if you go back to my podcast, see that I talked about, should Christians boycott Hollywood? And I mentioned Barbie in there because I didn't want to just talk about Barbie, but I think I referenced your article.
Oh, great.
I'm
Well,
pretty
thank you.
positive. That's so funny that you wrote that.
Yeah, well, and I'll connect it to technology for us. Barbie's coming out and I'm about to start school, so I'm very busy in my school prep, but I start to see all these Christian moms taking their kids to Barbie and loving it. And I thought, wait a second, you are not reading the full meaning of this story. It's just fun and bright and colorful, and it has a few little emotional beats thrown into it. And so being kind of caught up into taking your 9-year-old to a movie that if you understood how to read art and read culture and read the worldview that's really being communicated, you'd be a little more cautious, a little more discerning on the way you're responding to this movie. And to connect that to technology, that's, I think, what we need to do with technology, is that technology itself, like a movie, has embedded in it a worldview and values and meaning that are being communicated to us as we use the technology, and we're being formed in the meaning and the values and the worldview of the technology as we use it. But most of us don't know how to read that. We don't know how to see that. And so that's a lot of the cultural apologetic work I'm trying to do, is trying to help people have the tools they need to not just read the words that Barbie's saying, but to read the forms, that the worldview that's coming through the plot, that's coming through the characterization. And so we need to have technology. We need to learn how to read the meaning that's forming us in our social media, in our various forms of technology that we use.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's so good.
that's right on. That's really why we wrote the book. It's exactly what we're trying to do in the book. Trying to get us to think about how technology is forming us, or maybe even deforming us, and what it means to be a human being. We talk a lot in the book about how technology is not neutral, right? I think that's what you're getting at there as well, Annie, right? That baked into the technology is a certain assumption about the world, a certain assumption about what it means to be a person. And so what we need to do is sort of peel back the layers, right? Layer by layer, so that we can understand the technological environment that we're in. And then we're going to be better able to then deal with it, right? And live a Christian life and respond to it. So yeah, in the book, that's really exactly what we're doing. We're trying to peel back the layers, right? To help people get a better understanding of the technological environment we're in, that technology is not neutral, that it's always nudging us in a certain direction. Now, that's not to say that it's evil. That's not what we're arguing in the book. We're not arguing that technology is bad, but we're also not saying that it's neutral, right? And I think a great example to make this sort of drive this home is to think about how many tools, you're in a workshop there, Annie, many tools are designed for the right hand, okay, to be used by a right-handed person. Even scissors are designed for right-handed use. So that technology, that pair of scissors or a certain tool that's meant for the right hand, it's nudging you as a person to use your right hand. Okay. So it's not neutral. And we encounter that every day, right? From the shifting mechanisms on a car are all for the right hand, scissors are for the right hand, on and on we could go. If you're a left-handed person, you experience that a lot, right? Right-handed people don't even realize it because we favor the right hand. Now that may seem like a silly, minor example, but that's always happening with technology. It's nudging us in a certain direction. And if we can help people realize that, then we're on the right track, right? Then we can go from there, how we respond and so forth. So in the book, we have sections that deal with technology and education. We have sections that deal with technology in the church, technology in the home, technology in politics, society. And what we're trying to do is sort of walk people through how to think about it and then what to do about it, okay? Because there's a lot of books about technology. There's sort of an unending supply, and some are very positive on technology. Some are very negative. We're trying to sort of bridge the gap, talk about pros and cons, put a sort of a Christian framework on it. And also we're trying to bridge the gap between very technical literature about like neuroscience and brain development and how technology sort of impacts those things. There's also a lot of literature about the philosophy of technology that's sort of very highbrow. So we're trying to bring that down into the everyday language to make that stuff more accessible to people. And I think Christians have a lot to say in this space. We have so much to say in this space. Christianity is not just true for me or true for you. It's true to reality, right? And if it's true to reality, then it's the best way to live. And Christianity has a lot to say about what it means to be a human being, to be made in the image of God. That sort of flies in the face of so much that we're told in our cultural catechesis that we're constantly absorbing from the world. There's all sorts of ideas about what it means to be a human being in the culture. People say we're just flesh robots, or the human being is just a complex machine. Christianity has something to say about that. Christianity also has something to say about the body itself, that the body is good. So much of our culture tells us that the body's not good, that the true me is inside, and I need to transcend my body or even change my body or, heaven forbid, mutilate my body to make it who I really am. Christianity doesn't have that view, sort of a division or dichotomy between the body and the soul. The true me is my body.
Yeah.
Right. And then finally, we have the resurrection of the body promised in the scriptures, which goes against many of the sort of techno promises of the transhumanists who think we're going to somehow transcend our bodies and live forever digitally, being uploaded to the cloud or something like that. So on all these issues, Christianity just has these awesome answers. And we're trying to put all that together in a resource in this book.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how, and I don't know if people, like even what you said, the transhumanists are saying that, you'll transcend your body and be up in the cloud or whatever. It's so funny how it mimics that, the idea of the worldview questions that Christianity answers, like what happens after I
Sure.
die? How should I live? And, and all of the other ones. But it's so funny because it's funny, not ha funny, but in the irony of it, and people don't sometimes see that correlation of they're answering those questions very similarly, but they're just replacing heaven with the cloud. They're answering them differently. And I like that you're tackling them from a Christian worldview. And you both have mentioned that there is a worldview embedded into the, things like the Barbie movie, other methods of technology, even what's behind social media and how you're funneled and given your information. And so when you talk about technology, Josh, what are you, because when I think of technology, which is a very limited way of thinking, because it's not just limited to the phone, but that's what I think about. I'm thinking about this shaping me, because this does. I mean, when you think about the statistics on kids who are on this, I think a third of their day, the high school kids, like teenagers, middle school and up, 8 hours on these social media platforms. And when we're listening now to podcasts, we're watching YouTube, this is shaping us. This is what I would call is another discipler a worldview formation in the
Exactly.
lives of every human being. And so when you think of technology now, what are you thinking of? Because that's what I'm thinking of. And I'm not sure where the mind of the audience, like the person listening, is going to go to, but can you clarify what you mean by technology?
Sure. Yeah, we use the word in many different senses, don't we? Yeah. So let's parse this out a little bit. On the one hand, a technology is really any tool. It comes from the Greek word techne, which means tool. There's a variety of Greek meanings for the word, but in general, tool. So I could use the term technology very broadly, and we do that some in the book to make connections. Like I said, scissors are a technology. A pencil is a technology, right? A hammer is a technology. So there's a sense in which any tool is a technology. It's something that we use for a purpose. And even those things are nudging us in a certain direction, right? What do we say about a hammer? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a
Nail.
Yeah.
nail, right? So we know this already. We intuitively know that technologies form us and nudge us in a certain direction, right? When you have the hammer in your hand, you want to hammer things, right? We host some summer camps for kids. We do workshops at the house. My wife teaches home ec, and I teach shop class. And so I give kids hammers, a bunch of, 10, 12-year-olds hammers. And I get dents all over my shop where I'm not supposed to have dents, right? Because you put the hammer in their hand, they're going to want to hammer things, right? So, okay, that's like a broad definition of technology, any tool. But when we think of technology, like you said, Shonda, today, we're thinking of digital technologies, right? We're thinking of phones, we're thinking of laptops, we're thinking of anything that really has sort of a screen interface or a digital interface. Okay, so things with keyboards, things with screens. And now that's really even blurring more because now that's getting baked into other things like a refrigerator, right? Now a smart refrigerator has a screen and is telling you when to buy milk and is connected to the internet and all these things. We have the Internet of Things, it's called, right? So yeah, that would be the other way we use the term technology in the book to refer to really digital technologies or screen-based technologies.
Hmm.
If I could add something I find really helpful, totally agree with everything Josh said. The difference between a tool and a device, so
Yeah.
both can be seen as technologies, but a tool, maybe your older form of technology, tended to enhance a individual personal capacity, right? So I can hit things with my own hand, but if I have a hammer, that tool is going to extend and enhance my ability to hit something with force, with precision. So a tool will extend a personal capability. And I think this is important for education. So let me point out a pen and a paper is a tool that enhances my ability, my personal ability of language formation. So I'm forming words, speaking, that's a human capacity. The pen allows me to write those words down in a way that's permanent, visual, that's enhancing a personal capacity. It's a tool. What a device tends to do is replace a personal capacity. And so you have what's something like the device paradigm is when a function that a human normally does gets hidden behind a device that's replacing my personal agency. So Grammarly, okay, the pen and the paper or a word processor is enhancing, is a tool that enables my language formation. Grammarly is a device that's replacing it for me. It's doing it for me.
Mm.
And another example might be heating my home. So I would have an axe, that's a tool, and a fireplace, a kind of technology tool where I can cut wood and I can bring that wood in and heat my home. And those tools are enhancing my capacity to make heat. But when I go click on my thermostat, it's a device. It's replacing my ability, my personal individual agency. It's replacing it, and it's hiding the process from me. Okay, so I think that's a helpful distinction, and why we tend to, the old technologies, those were tools, those were technologies, but we've shifted into a new kind that's replacing personal agency with kind of mass scale technologies. So I find that difference helpful, especially when we get practical on what technologies to give our children and which we need to defer and be cautious with.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
right on. We have in the book we have a chapter on Albert Borgman, which he talks about the device paradigm, which you're developing there. In the education section too, we talk about the difference between technologies that enhance human faculties versus replace human faculties, or I use the word atrophy human
Mm,
faculties, right?
mm.
Like you said, a great example. Grammarly actually atrophies our ability to articulate and develop, good writing and grammar and so forth. Whereas the pencil, the pen, or even a keyboard introduced at the right time, once we already know how to write with our hands, right? Those things can enhance our faculty, our ability to communicate and articulate well. Yeah, so the device paradigm is very helpful. We do talk about that in the book. And thank you, Annie, as well, for bringing up the point that's also what makes digital technologies different. That is one of the things we argue in the book, and we have a whole series of sort of philosophers of technology that we're building upon to make this argument that there is something different about digital technologies. It's not just a new tool because of it sort of functions in the device paradigm, and also because it comes to reality, it comes to mediate reality to us in a way that prior technologies did not. Okay, like you can't live inside your hammer. Okay, to go back to the hammer example, you can sort of live inside the internet to a certain degree. I mean, not physically, right? But you can have your whole experience of reality mediated to you from a screen and through a screen. And so there is something very different about that experience of digital technologies. Again, not that it's automatically evil or bad, but we do need to realize that that is a very new and very different experience of reality to always be having it mediated to us through screens.
Okay. So you guys are firing lots of questions that I didn't write here I didn't prepare. And I knew this was going to happen. I said, I've come to terms with the fact that I'm either nosy and just like to know lots of stuff, or I'm just really curious. And it's probably a combination of the two. But I have two things. First, just last week, I had reposted a reel, and it was of a news source that was talking about how, and I can't remember the stats, but I can say that it was high school and college age students, that their ability to read books, just finish books and to follow linear arguments, just follow along to see, here's the beginning, middle, end, and here's the conclusion. Does that make sense? Can I respond to those things? It was a significant decrease in the number of kids who are reading and even understanding what they're listening to processing it and come to intellectual conclusions. Just maybe intellectual is too strong of a word, just to be able to understand, right? So obviously, I would say there has to be, maybe your book and your message, the both of you, your message is, we got to make people aware. Specifically, we're coming at this from a Christian worldview, so we want everybody to be aware, but we need to let the church be aware that this is how we ought to navigate, because we don't want devices that atrophy I guess our ability to form sentences and punctuation and be able to think and etc. But at the same time, the easy life is going to be the one that we succumb to. So I would say that it's probably we're not going to be able to change anybody's mind. Like the majority of the culture is probably going to go down that path of easy technology. But what do you say to parents, or even, just adults, to say, be aware of this so it doesn't happen? Would you tell them not to use Grammarly? Like, what's the fix? How do we not allow the atrophy, I guess you could say?
I have a million thoughts going all at once. I think, Shonda, a lot of what you do and a lot of what I do is knowledge can be power. Understanding deeply how this stuff works can really help us wake up, make better decisions. And so in terms of, I want to go back and a little bit, make sure it's really clear on how our tools shape us. So Marshall McLuhan, he's a really important philosopher of technology. He says we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. Okay, and if we think of it, a simple example of a shovel, it's a tool I'm going to use to enhance my capacity to shape the world. I'm going to dig a hole, I'm going to make a mountain, I'm going to make a trench. Okay, I'm using the tool to shape the world. But what we don't realize and see, and we really need to start to see, is the way the tool, as I use it, is then shaping me. The more I dig, the more muscle I'm building. The more I dig, the more skill, adeptness with the shovel that I'm gaining. And then we really want to think, especially when we get to digital technologies, to think about the neurology, right? You've heard the phrase, maybe neurons that fire together, wire together. So when I shovel that, do that motion, there's a neurological pathway that's firing, that's connected to that. And the more that I fire that neurological pathway, dig, 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 the more my mind will, what's called myelinate, or cover with lipids, or wire together that particular pathway, making a kind of superhighway so that that action is easy. So really, me using the tool is actually shaping the structure of my brain, right? And our brains do that to make those repeated actions easier, and to protect important pathways and that kind of stuff. So, but what we need to realize is that our actions quite literally become a part of our embodied person, and then thereby form who we are. And so if we take this to the digital level and then specifically apply it to this problem of this inability to read books, right? Okay, so what I read, the action of learning to read, learning to be literate, learning is neurologically wiring my brain to easily recognize words. And but when we read online, there's a different structure to that activity than there is when we read in a book, right? So you think about, and I've really been feeling this personally and being challenged to address this in my personal life because I do a lot of online work now. And when I'm online, I'm scanning, I got my email, I'm going to click to that tab, I'm scrolling, I'm maybe going to click on this. And so reading on an online landscape is structured to be disparate, a little bit chaotic, fragmented, disconnected. Josh, you really did a good job in the book. If you wrote that chapter on that type of reading, also exercises a lot of decision making. I got to decide where to click here or there. So not only is it training my eyes and my reading habits and forming my brain to scan and jump around and bounce around, and it's also draining my decision-making capacity. So this is why we think, oh, I'm just going to take 5 minutes and relax and scroll social media. It's not actually relaxing because it is demanding that we use our decision-making capacities in order to navigate the chaotic space. Okay, so the more I do that, the more I read online, the more I read bits and scroll and move and bounce, the more my brain is wiring for that kind of behavior. Then when I go and open a book, and the book demands that I slow down and move left to right, line by line by line. There's no bouncing, there's no decision making. It's a different pattern of reading that I've trained, that it's different. And so I think this analogy I find really helps me. If we think of marathon runners and weightlifters, they're both using their body, but they're using their body in ways that are fairly different and not complementary. So the marathon runner, if he repeatedly runs and runs and runs and trains his body and forms his body in the values and structures of long distance running, he cannot go to the gym. Okay, I'm going to reveal my ignorance and squat 350. I don't know what men squat. Because the kind of muscles that you need, the kind of cardiovascular physical structure you need to be good at marathon running is different than the kind of muscular structure that you need for weightlifting. And that is a visual parallel that can help us understand what's happening to our brains when we're online reading, that when I get good at scanning and bouncing around and scrolling, it's forming my mind in different ways of moving and thinking that are not conducive to excellence in deep reading. And so that's why I think we're finding that even our Ivy League college bound students who are spending, like you said, 6, 7, 8 hours a day training their brain to function this way, then go to a book, and a book takes, maybe more like a marathon, slow, steady attention to one idea as it develops. They can't do it. They can't do it because their mind has been formed in other values.
Mm,
Is that helpful?
that's good. Very good.
Yeah, I love the analogy. Maybe I just tweak it a little bit and to say that what's happening in the digital formation isn't even weightlifting. Maybe it's like eating a potato chip. You know what I mean? Because yeah, there's a very positive value of weightlifting and a very positive value of marathon running. But I'd venture to say that I'm not sure that the benefits of that digital formation in that sort of bouncing around method of reading, always clicking on hyperlinks and so forth, I'm not sure that's really something that's providing positive human formation when it comes to skills and virtues. I could be wrong, but so I don't know. What do you think about that, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a limited usefulness, and you
Yeah.
do. So if we watch that documentary called The Social Dilemma, which I
Yep.
really recommend, I think it's really helpful for a really helpful movie to understand some of the things we're talking about in a different medium, in a visual
Right.
storytelling medium. That the scrolling and the social media and the online space hijacks our dopamine system, right? Our high alert, scanning the horizon for a danger that might be there. So it's a similar kind of system. That system has a place
Right.
in human neurology, but that place is
Sure.
pretty limited in its usefulness.
Yeah. Times of, danger or need.
So
Yeah.
the ability to scan something really quickly in a kind of high alert mode, that can be a skill, but it's limited, and this is why we have so much anxiety. Why I'll speak to your women in your audience who are my age. We struggle to keep our cortisol levels down, right? Because so much of our world is triggering our dopamine system. It's part of why we're high stress. We can't lose weight. We're high anxiety because that high alert system is not meant to run all the time.
Mhm. No, that's very interesting. So would you say, either one of you can answer to this, would you say the best way to, because that's here, that's going to stay, it could
Mhm.
continue to evolve wherever it's going to go. But what is the way to navigate it? Because even Jordan Peterson has said, if you want to know how to really rise above in this culture, know how to read, write, and speak, because those are becoming lost arts. And even my son, he's at a Christian school now, my youngest, because we're done with the public education system and all that we've had to fight with that for a while. But he has a public speaking class, and he was super freaked out about it at the beginning of the school year, just like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this. And I said, you need to push through it. And then she even, the teacher was great and told them some of the things that hinder being able to just go up there now for them. It's not just, oh, I have anxiety to stand in front of, an audience. It's because they're also fighting the way that technology has shaped their social skills, that now when they go up and stand in front, it's a whole other way of communicating. And I thought that was a very insightful thing that she told them, because that wasn't the case when I was his age, in a public speaking. So I can see where Jordan Peterson is right. Like, wow, you're telling me that in order to really stand out in this culture, you just need to know how to read, write, and speak well. Of course, he's saying articulate, have some punctuation and stuff. But would you guys say the way to navigate the things that will atrophy those abilities, whatever they might be, not make life more useful, but atrophy your ability to do certain things, is to master that skill before you rely on the technology to help you with it? Okay.
I think that's definitely part of it in the education realm. I think that's a good principle to follow, that first you want the individual to master the skill or the faculty before introducing a technology, right? We do this with calculators, right? We don't give kindergartners a calculator in general. First, we have them memorize, or at least we used to have them memorize their math facts. And if you don't ever memorize your math facts, you're never going to be as good as at math, right? Because you've not developed that skill. I think, personally, we've done similar things with our own kids. Before we introduced a keyboard for them to type a paper, first we spent a lot of time on handwriting, right? And they write their papers first by hand, and then they go to the computer to type them. So that basic principle, yes, is a good one. We want to first develop the human skills, and then when we can introduce some of those technologies in the tool paradigm, not the device paradigm, right? Try to keep them in the tool paradigm. And then they have a good use, or they can be beneficial. I think that's a good principle in general. And I would say too, with things like computers and smartphones, if you can take it out of the device paradigm that Annie was talking about, right? And by that, I mean, turn it into a one-use tool, right? Like when you want to use your computer for something, use it for that task, okay? And then be done with it. Don't have 7 windows open and Microsoft Word open and PowerPoint open and all the rest, because multitasking is a myth, first off, and there's a huge brain cost when you're constantly switching, right? We talk about this in the book. There's so much research emerging on this topic that we think we're multitasking, we think we're being efficient, but really we're not. We're becoming inefficient at all the tasks, and there's sort of a low-level brain cost that continues to drain brain resources even after you switch back to the task that you were on. So try to turn the computer back into a tool. Okay, so when I want to do writing an article, I should probably just have Microsoft Word open, right? When I want to do my email, just do my email well, okay? When I want to, if I have social media, when I want to do social media, just do that, put some boundaries around it, right? And then be done with it. Don't let it bleed into everything else. I think that's part of the risk of the device paradigm, of the smartphone, of the laptop, whatever, is it's so easy for it just constantly to be on, constantly to be bleeding into everything else, that we get exhausted, right? We don't even realize why. But in large part, as Annie said, that's a big part of why we're dealing with stress and anxiety all the time, is because we are not designed as human creatures to constantly be doing that.
Yeah, you're talking to me now. I got too many windows open. You guys don't want to see, but that's a
No,
good.
it's so easy to do. I mean, it's just it again, that maybe it's sort of nudging us there, right? It's nudging us because it can do all those things. We're nudged to try to do all those things, but we as human beings aren't designed to do all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree that a key principle is delaying as much as possible. Do everything you can to give your children as long of a human, natural, incarnational, physically focused upbringing as you can. You know, keep the screens and the phones and the devices pushed as far back as you can so that they are living in this incarnate world close to nature, the things that God has made with their hands in the dirt and their eyes on the sky and the birds and the trees, and really being close to the things that God himself has made. The heavens declare the glory of God. He is speaking to us his presence and the meaning of who he is and our relationship with him through the things that he has made. That's something really important, I think, for Christian parents to recover an understanding of, is that God is communicating to us through his world. And so if we're going to understand him, this is the principle of, for those in apologetics, general revelation versus special revelation, right? God communicates to us in general revelation through the creation. He is day unto day pouring forth speech, night unto night, giving us knowledge, as Psalm 19 says. And it's actually special revelation, God's word to us in scripture and the person of Jesus Christ, is actually, in a sense, dependent on general revelation. It's through my experience of trees and fire and skies and seas and lilies of the field and birds of the air. It's my experience of God's world that then gives those parables and those teachings and those stories in scripture meaning. And so I think we really need to recognize for our children a life in contact with creation is a very important part of their spiritual formation, so that their contact with God, the glory of God, his presence that he's pouring out through the things he's made. It gives them the ability to read scripture. and it's forming their minds and their spirits in patterns and rhythms that we were made for, if that makes sense. And then the more you can delay that move into a digital space, then the more deeply their bodies, their affections, their habits are rooted in a natural way of living, the more tolerant they will be of the downsides of a digital space. So I like to think about a tree, right? And very much our neurology is very tree shaped, right? And so if you think of you're growing a tree, if you can let that tree grow under good conditions, then that trunk and those those basic branches will be upright and straight and well formed. And then as the secondary branches form, those can grow back and reform fairly well. But if a tree is growing under wind and bizarre light conditions, right, you'll see tree trunks grow sideways, trying to reach the light, trying to deal with the wind. And then once the tree trunks are really formed, you can't grow them upright again. Right? So that's an analogy that really helps me think about my children, is that if I let them grow those deep neurological connections and habits whole when they're young, so they've got nice, upright, strong, they'll be able to deal with the secondary challenges of life later on. But if I give them an iPad when they're 4, okay, the fundamental neurological structure of their mind is going to be formed bent. And then when you're older, you have less neurological plasticity. When you're older, you have like a tree, you can kind of start to grow this way, but you can't go back and change those fundamental structures of the tree nor of the human mind. This is why childhood trauma is such a big deal, right? Because of the way the mind and the body is formed in those early years. So that tree analogy is an encouragement to parents. And you know what? There's God's grace, right? God works all things for good. Wherever you are today, do what you can for your children to give them an incarnate, embodied childhood and delay. They can catch up on screens later. We can all learn how to use, a social media app in 2 days. They don't need to practice now. That can wait till later. Do everything you can to delay engagement with that digital world.
That's good. There's a
Yeah,
couple.
absolutely.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's we want to think about the positive formation, right? A lot of times technology, we think about, oh, don't do this, don't do that. But as Annie's saying here, it's more about the positive formation, the better alternative that we have, right, in this real embodied world. And so especially with children, we want to build a reservoir of humane embodied experience, right? That roots them deeply in what it means to be an incarnate human being, so that then they can navigate the digital spaces more effectively and efficiently. So yes, that's really important, the positive vision aspect, right? Yes, we have limits and boundaries, but also we're replacing, okay? We're not just saying no to something, we're replacing it with something better, okay? And a lot of things in your home, you can take steps in this direction. Simply thinking about spaces and where you put things, right? So instead of having the computer and the television in a very prominent place in the home, what about having books and a musical instrument and board games prominently placed, right? So that you can, the default is to go to those things, right? Not the screens. There's all sorts of just simple steps you can take. And we have quite a bit of this in the book. We have a section on boundaries. And again, both the limit side and the positive vision side, to try to flesh this out and give families ideas, right? We're not saying you must do this or you must do that, but we're throwing ideas out there that are based on research, right? That families have done and tried and saw benefits from. And suggesting them something you can do, because as Annie said, wherever you're at now, there's steps you can take in a positive direction, and we need to. We're getting schooled right now by a evolutionary psychologist, okay, an atheist, on these topics. And we have more to say than he does, right? Now, there's a lot of general revelation in here, as Annie said. There's a lot of just common sense truth and research-based truth. But we Christians can go even further. We have more to say than he does. And that's sort of what, we're trying to do in this book, is sort of going from here. This book was written, just came out when we were finishing this one up. Going from here and going a little bit further with the Christian worldview and going beyond the home, going beyond the school, into the home, into the church, and so forth. Because a lot of Haidt's advice really relates to schools, right? And what we should do with schools. He does have, I'm just going to reiterate his 4 basic pieces of advice. And again, this is from sort of an evolutionary psychologist, just from the research. He has no theological, agenda or anything like that. He says no smartphones before high school, no social media before the age of 16. He says school should be phone free, and that there should be far more unsupervised play and childhood independence, right? I think those are 4 very basic and sort of core fundamental reforms that we should be willing to think about and willing to try out.
And
Yeah.
Josh, I'll
Oh, go
add
ahead.
his testimony. Yeah, sorry, I'll add his testimony real quick. That is, by God's grace, the exact sort of structure we ended up with our 3 daughters. And now that they're grown, 22, 20, 18, about to be 19, they thank us often for delaying the phone use, even though they fought us. And and I think it's helpful as a parent, your children are going to fight you.
Yeah.
They're going to push on boundaries. That's just what they do. That's how they test their world. So take a deep breath. It's okay. You can handle the conflict. And once the kid knows the boundary is there, they will back off. And my girls thank me often for that. In fact, sometimes they wish we had done more. They wish we had waited longer to give them the phone. They wish we had stricter boundaries. And so just as an encouragement, I remember being in those young years and those teenage years and how hard it is to put up boundaries and to hold the boundaries against the push of the world, the nudge of the devices, the attitude of your children, and an encouragement of it's worth it, and be there for each other. And, it's so helpful. The friends I had who, I'd call my friend Rebecca, are you letting your daughter have, no, we're going to do this together. We're not going to let them have, Instagram together. It's worth it. But I know it's hard, but got to fight the good fight. We got to recover. This is why Jordan Peterson's so popular. We got to recover a sense of the heroic.
Yeah.
Mom, you are Iron Man. You are Black Widow. You are Captain America. You have the opportunity, Christian parents raising your children in this world, to do what is heroic, to fight sacrificially and courageously for what's truly good. It's worth the fight.
Yeah, it's worth a fight because your kids, their innocence and their worldview development and all of those things that make them who they are is being formed in those moments. And like you said, your daughters now look back and say thank you. That's the Proverbs 31. Her children will rise up and call her blessed. It doesn't mean in that moment, thanks, Mom, for taking my phone away from me or not letting me have a phone. It's eventually they're gonna grow up and they're gonna say, wow, now that I realize how detrimental the effects of technology can be, you protected me from that. And that's our job. And I was actually thinking, Josh, before you had showed me the book about Jonathan Haidt, with I didn't know that he had come out with that. I was like, there's a lot of school districts that are now saying, well, I don't know about a lot, but more and more school districts are finally coming out and saying no phones at school. And which I think there's something catching on here for, for even the secular world saying this isn't having a great effect on our kids.
Yeah, exactly. And Haidt's book is a big influence why states and districts are implementing this policy. I did it before it was cool.
Yes, you
I
did.
think I started in like 2016 or 20, I don't remember what year it was, but several years ago, man, the smartphone was in the classroom and it was just destroying the classroom. It was just a distraction. And our school had no official policy. And so I went to my principal over the summer and I said, hey, look, I've been reading a lot of books and research on these topics. I want to try to, take kids' phones in class. Can I do that? He sort of looked at me and he went, huh, you can try it.
Mm.
And so I did. I developed a policy. I laid it out. I explained why we were doing it. And I told them, hey, I'm going to put my phone in the pouches too. So basically I had pouches for all their phones. And, I told them this isn't about, oh, you're bad kids because you have phones. It's that we have something better to do, right? This is about your formation. This is about being a part of the conversation that is education, right? And bringing you into something better than your phones, right? And so that's sort of how I framed it in a positive way. And I said, hey, look, I'm going to do this with you. We're going to do it together. And of course, I got some crossed arms and rolled eyes and all the rest. But, you know, after a few days, there was very little resistance. They put their phones in the pouches. And by the end of the year, you know, they really looked back on that and they were like, yeah, we did this. We did this, you know. And then guess what? The whole school did it next year. My principal said, hey, I want you to present to the whole school. We'll do it at the whole school. And so and again, that was before this was becoming a popular thing. And I had so many teachers that next year when it became the school-wide policy come up to me and say, thank you. You got my classroom back. You know, now granted, the phone is just one distraction, right? But we can remove that distraction from the educational environment. I think that is a good basic step to take, to get the phone out of the pocket, because even if it's in your pocket, it's drawing attention away. It's a distraction, even if it's not on, right? Again, there's tons of research on this. If a phone is on the table or in your pocket or even in the room, if it's even in the room with you, right? There's like a drain that's occurring, okay, with your brain focus and attention. So that I think is a very basic step that all schools, even, you know, parents who homeschool, we homeschool our kids. I teach in a little classical co-op for high schoolers now. I collect their phones even when there's only 10 kids and we're just sitting around talking. We just get them out of our pockets, and I do the same thing. Yeah, I think that's a very basic starting point, very important one for people to think about.
So there's a couple questions that you answer in your book. You answer more than a couple, but I pulled a couple to talk about on the podcast. The first one is, as social life migrates from in-person communities to the online ecosystem, what are the implications for our humanity, our relationships, and our sense of self? Can you talk about that a little bit? And we could read the rest of it in the book, but what would you say that your answer to that question is?
So I think that as we move from nature, physically incarnate context into digital contexts, we're moving, you know, as I said earlier, from realities God has made from trees and rocks and dirt and sky into representations. On our screens, what we see are representations. In a sense, if I don't know if your audience is going to be familiar with the analogy of Plato's cave, you know, and for Plato, reality is a series of layers from, you know, the forms which are true to then physical realities, and then art for Plato is the lowest level of reality. The representation is the furthest away from what is real. So at least we can understand what Plato's talking about in the move from a real chair to a picture of a chair, right? From a real tree to a picture or a representation of a tree. So when we move into the online world, we're moving from incarnational realities into representations. Now, as we talked about earlier, it's not that representation is itself evil. We are creators. We're made in the image of the creator God. We are sub-creators, as Tolkien calls it. We're made to make things and make art. And so representation isn't bad. But what's bad is when we get confused about the nature of reality, when we start to replace representations for reality, when we live too much of our life, a disproportionate amount of our life in a world of representations. And I think there's a couple problems with the move to the realm of representations. You know, one is that we're more easily deceived, right? Because those representations can be very subtly, very easily manipulated. And that's why do we not see everywhere in information a truth crisis? Like, we're not sure if that's AI generated or if people are making that up. So the more we live in a world of representations, the more easily we are deceived and the harder it is for us to tell truth from falsehood. And then, you know, one thing I've been noticing as an illustration of this and paying attention to, and I think it was 6 or 7 years ago that I first heard someone say this. I think we were hiking at some park and I overheard, you know, someone else have a conversation and they said, oh, wow, look at that mountain. It looks just like a painting. And I thought, wait a second. Painters make paintings to look like mountains. And we are now so living in a world of online reality that when, the one time someone gets outside, their perception of reality is shifted. So they see the mountain as a copy of the painting rather than the painting as a copy of the mountain. Does that make sense? We were out on a walk the other night, and my daughter said, oh, look at the moon. It's like they made the moon from DreamWorks into real life. And I thought, okay, child, she's just trolling me because she knows that this is like one of my things I'm looking for. But you see this shift in our understanding of what reality is, that shift leads us to be more easily deceived, to be more confused about what's real, what's true, what's false. And then I think, a third problem with this move from realities into representations is it actually robs us of our joy. A little bit back to what I was talking about before, there's a unique glory in the things that God has made. His presence is especially potent in the face. Like it's wonderful here on Zoom, I can see your faces, but it would be even more wonderful to see it in real life, right? And it's wonderful to see a painting of Rainier, Mount Rainier, a beautiful mountain. It is 10 times more glorious to walk on the slopes of Mount Rainier. And so when we move away from realities to representations, we're losing much of the joy that God has made for us to experience in this world. So that's, a diminution of knowledge, a confusion about truth, a diminution of our joy. I think those are ways that moving into the online landscape affects our humanity.
Yeah. And Josh, you
We've
said
sort of
something
come
about the
to
autonomy that social media allows for this autonomy. I can create this profile that, shows people who I really am when they don't really know who you are.
Yeah, it's so easy to create really a false sense of self, right? Whoever I want to be. You can even have multiple identities online, right? This is very common, especially amongst Gen Z, to have like multiple profiles for different purposes, and that's training us to think we're in more control than we are, right? That we're autonomous beings, that we're not creatures of God. Instead, we're our own creators, right? We're self-creators. Now, certainly, there is a sense as human beings we are sub-creators, as Annie said, right? There's a proper understanding of that as creatures who are mirroring God in some way. But we've taken the top rung, right? We've claimed the status of deity himself and are now self-creating. And so we're being trained in the digital environment to self-create. And also, I think it sort of fragments our identity as well. Because we can have different profiles for different purposes, and we can sort of curate them exactly how we want. And one of the chapters I call this fine-grained identity. It's a term that I get from a recent book about Gen Z. And we can also do the same for our communities as well. We can create these sort of niche communities for this group or that group, right? I'm a person who likes this, this is one of my interests, so I find a group about that. Or we can sort of tune in a very fine and granular way our communities, which is not how real life communities work.
Right.
You don't choose your family. You don't necessarily choose your coworkers, right? Those are things that are given to you. And that's what it means to be a creature, is to have things given to you from the creator and from the environment in which you're in. And so the online environment is like training us in exactly the opposite direction, thinking that, that we are God instead of a creature of God. So that's a big one, the autonomy thing. And I think also, to sort of piggyback off what Annie was saying, it's disembodiment is another big aspect of it, right? That's sort of another way to maybe talk about what you were talking about with representation versus reality, right? It's a disembodied environment. It's disconnected from my body. And that is a very, we should think of that as a jarring thing, right? To experience reality separate from my real body in real time space. Um, so those are some other ways. If I could just piggyback off what Annie was saying as well, it's like we're enjoying the shadows, right? Instead of the reality, to go back to Plato's cave. It's like we're playing in the dung heap instead of digging for gold. And I think that's another aspect of the digital environment we really need to think about, and that's our desires, okay? Our desires. Humans are desiring creatures. And it's so easy online to go for second-rate thrills, to go for those shallow satisfactions, right? We're being trained to really play in the dung heap, like I said, instead of going deeper to dig for the gold. And that is, I think, another big aspect that we don't think about enough. How is this retraining my desires as a person to like the things that actually aren't as valuable as truth, goodness, and beauty? I think that's really important to think about.
Well, even look at Facebook. Like when I think about Facebook, you have friends and you can have thousands of friends on Facebook. And
Mhm.
in some of them are from high school that I never talked to. Like we never talk to each other, even to this day, but they're called friends. And then on Instagram, it's called followers, where you can get this idea of, yeah, I have this many followers
Mhm.
with it almost alludes to the fact that you're an expert of some sort, like you're an authority because of all the followers. And it's funny because I don't throw that word friend around. I even used to tell my boys when they were younger in elementary school and they would talk about casually say this friend and that friend, but then talk about how that friend treated them. And I would say, is that what a friend is? What does God's word say about a friend? What does God's word say about being friendly to other people and how you gain true friendships? And so we even had to look at just that word. And then lo and behold, Facebook comes out with, friends. And I think it does create
Yeah.
this false sense of not even just community, but relationship. That's not a really, if somebody likes you or likes your post or comments on it, it doesn't mean that we look at that almost as, wow, they accept me. It's an investment into our relationship when that's not. And we have to even teach our kids, go as far as teaching the basics of true friendship and relationship. So it's funny how that can become so skewed, whereas before we didn't have to consider it as much.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's exactly right. Jonathan Haidt has a helpful framework when he talks about real world relationships versus digital or virtual relationships. I'm just going to highlight a few things here. I think it's a helpful way to think about this. It relates just to what we were saying. Real world relationships and social interactions, he says, are embodied, synchronous, one to one or one to several, and that they take place in communities that have a high bar for entry and exit. Okay, so they're embodied, right? We're using our bodies to communicate. We're conscious of the bodies of others. We respond to the bodies of others, both consciously and unconsciously. So that's the embodied part. Then that they're synchronous, right? They're taking place at the same time. So there's cues that people are giving. I talk, I listen, so forth. And also the scale is pretty small. It's a humane scale, right? In general, in-person communication takes place one-to-one or one to several. Obviously, there's exceptions, right, when you speak to a big crowd and so forth, but that's nothing like an online crowd, if you will. And then fourth, there's a high bar for entry in that community, right? Now, if we think about the digital landscape, in general, it's the exact opposite of these four things, right? It tends to be disembodied by its very nature, right? It's through a screen. They tend to be asynchronous, meaning like you post something and then people like it and then you respond to a comment, right? Or even text messages is asynchronous, right? In general. And it's usually one to many, especially in the social media environment, right? I'm posting something that then all of my friends or followers see. Um, and then it's also a very low bar, right? You were talking about online friends, right? That's a very low bar for entry and exit, right? I can click friend, but then I also can later, unfriend them and they'll never know, right?
Right.
And those four key differences, I think, are a helpful way to think about it. So what we're doing today, just to give an example, this is pretty good for a digital interaction. Okay, we can see each other's faces, so we can pick up on cues, right? Hands and eyes and smiles and frowns and all the rest. And it's synchronous, right? We're talking to each other in real time. So there's, you might sort of create a hierarchy of online interactions, and some are better than others. And I think Height's framework can help us think about which ones are better than others.
Yeah, that's good. The other question that I had that you answer in the book, and I just love that you use the word cyborgs because I feel like that's where we're headed, right? It's so weird because you could watch these movies from 20 years ago and think, oh yeah, that's never going to happen. And then pretty soon it's like, what the heck are we talking about now? You're like, this is the sci-fi movie that I was, freaked out about 20 years ago. But the only one that I don't feel like came to pass was Back to the Future when there's flying cars in like 2020 something. I forget what year they said. I'm like, could you guys have not gotten that one right? But anyways, I digress. The question is, in a world where young people increasingly seek digitized romantic partners and philosophers, excuse me, I should have had a comma there. Romantic partners and philosophers speculate about uploading consciousness to computer terminals. Are we all in danger of turning into cyborgs? Like, even asking that doesn't seem, I'm like, how could they do that? Like, but then I hear Elon Musk is possibly coming out with this thing where they can put it into your, I don't know if you've even heard about this. Somebody was telling me about it, where he can upload it
Neuralink.
into your brain.
Neuralink.
Neuralink, thank you. And you could just like, Google it in your mind or something. I don't know. And I'm just like, how is this even a possibility?
Yeah, yeah. So we did try to go with a catchy title, right? That's important when you write a book. But we do talk about some of those, more extreme forms of cyborg existence, right? A chip in your brain and things like that. But really what we're trying to do in the book is more subtle than that. We're trying to help us think about how maybe we already are
Mhm.
cyborgs in a certain way, not because we have a chip implanted in our brain or something like that, but because we're having reality mediated to us through the digital environment. Okay. And that already changes how we think about ourselves. It rewires our brains, as Annie was talking about it earlier, right? So we're already in some ways merging with the machine, okay? Which is sort of a traditional definition of a cyborg, some sort of human machine hybrid, if you will. So that's really what we're trying to do in the book is yes, warn about some of these future scenarios and give people a way to think about those things, but also take it to a more subtle point that maybe we're already merging with the machine and need to reclaim and retain our humanity. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's a really great way of looking at it. I always like it when people can break it down to like, before we think beyond to this, this, would that really happen? What's happening now? And how should we think about it? Because I just think that we can always look to the future, but ignore the reality of what's taking place and how to handle that. So that was really good to ground that back into that. Um,
Yeah,
so my,
I mean, if I could add just one more point to maybe drive it home, think of all the ways that we're already trained in a very machine-like way, okay? Even the way we talk about our brain, we talk about it as if it's a computer.
Mhm.
Um, we talk about our bodies like as if they're well-oiled machines, right? So we're already through the digital environment being nudged to think about ourselves as machines. We like to find techniques to solve our problems. It's a very mechanistic way of thinking about me as a person. So yeah, that's I think what we're trying to do is how make people realize how are we already thinking of ourselves as machines in this environment? Yeah.
And if I can connect it to education as well, we started by talking about the need to read the meaning and the values of our technology and the way that it's shaping us. And so, as Josh is saying, we're becoming cyborgs in the sense that our neurology, our behaviors, our metaphors, our paradigms are structured according to the values and the logic of the machines. And I would just say, it would be good to name, like I think you were saying, Shonda, the worldview has to do with the story we tell, the way that we answer those questions, right? So the machine or technological world has a story that says, our problem is the limits of our body, or yeah, I would just say that the problem is the limits of our body. That's the fall. What's our redemption? The development of technology so as to overcome the limits of our body that will lead us to, the new heavens and new earth, this kind of technological utopia. That's the story our technology is telling us. And a lot of this is driven through actually the structures of advertising. This is a very interesting history, but tech factories got so good at making stuff that we actually had an excess of stuff. And so the advertising industry developed so as to sell us stuff we don't need. Right. And so through advertising is conditioning us according to, the industrial machine that we believe we need more than we do, so that we'll purchase what we do. So the value, okay, that's the worldview, the story inherent in a lot of these technologies. That the problem of our life is a limit of our body that will be solved by buying some kind of new thing, new stuff, new tech. And the values in the tech, efficiency, autonomy, the ability to be really fast and to process information quickly, autonomy, the ability to do whatever I want, freedom from work, right? The machine taking over my work for me, so I don't. Those are the values. Now, are those kingdom values? Are those the values of Christianity? For me to have autonomy, to do whatever I want, for me to have more stuff, more profit, for me to be as efficient as possible. They're not the values of the kingdom. And this is one way that, I think Christians need to pay attention to and read the values of our stuff and then think, okay, I'm going to, maybe the way that I'm going to cook dinner. Am I going to go buy a factory-made pie at dinner? That would be efficient. Or am I going to make it? Well, the decision will be based off my values. What's my value? Just to have more at an easier? Or is my value to communicate love to my family? To show that I'm going to take the time and develop my own creative skill in the world and communicate love. I'm going to choose the less techie answer because my values as a Christian are a little different. They have to do with love and creativity and declaring the glory of God through the way I live in the world, not necessarily efficiency and autonomy and freedom from labor. Mm-hmm. So I hope that is helpful to think about. If we think about reading the values, that can also help us inform our decisions and make better decisions.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, think of how inefficient it is to care for an elderly person,
yeah,
right? Or to walk with somebody through depression, or to raise a young little one, right? Those are extremely inefficient things, but they're deeply beautiful and deeply human, right? That's what we're made for. And you could even go further to the incarnation itself. The incarnation was not efficient, okay? If we had a God of efficiency, he would have churned something out and punched the tickets and we'd be good. But instead, God becomes a human being. That's like highly inefficient, right? And think of it more, even when he came at a time when he would have to walk around, and talk to people face to face. There was no radio, there was no television, there was no internet, right? No printing press even. It was to think of it that way, I think really can get us out of the efficiency mindset that Jesus was inefficient. Okay, I know I'm putting it provocatively, but there's something there, right? Jesus walked around. Jesus slowed down. God slowed down. God stopped on the cross, if you will. Again, I know I'm putting it provocatively to make the point, but Jesus let himself hang there on the cross, okay, and die. Very inefficient, if you will.
Yeah.
That's
not
really
a machine.
Good.
Not a machine at all.
Yeah, that's good. I think when that's very profound. I feel like that's a very powerful thing to think through and put everything into perspective, because we have been conditioned to do things efficiently, get it done quickly so I can go on to the next thing. And when you're talking about walking with somebody through divorce, walking through, like, even my Nana right now is on hospice and we're all going over there and taking turns being with her and sitting with her and just looking at the process of death itself, and us wanting to be like, oh, I don't want her to suffer. I want her to hurry up and go. But knowing that it's in God's timing and that there is a process to it, and just being with her in those moments, that is called an investment in another person, another human being. It's doing life with somebody. And that's what Jesus did with his disciples. And really, that is the essence of discipleship. It is a long game, if you will. It is a investment where you don't feel efficient many, many times, because you are going through even the frustration of being the teacher-student relationship, I guess you could say, because that is difficult. And there is a process to even learning and knowing that you have to build on concepts. I'm using this as a teacher, in a teacher analogy at the moment, but no matter what, that is an investment, and investments they don't happen quickly. They take a while.
Yeah. And as you're walking with your grandma as she is passing away, there are more efficient ways to deal with that.
Yeah.
And, we hear people talking about, well, robot nurses or robot elderly care or the MAID program in Canada, but that's not what life's about. Life's about spiritual formation, forming our souls into the image of Christ. And what you and your family are doing as you're taking care of her, waiting on the Lord's timing, there are so many processes going on in your spirit, learning. I've seen, as my own grandma was dying, I saw so much work God was doing in the family, in their relationships, and learning people who didn't get along, learning to value the gifts of others. This life is about spiritual formation, and that isn't an efficient process. And so when we accept the values of technology and prioritize efficiency, we are often cutting short that the spiritual formation God is wanting to do to prepare us for heaven, to prepare us for glory, to prepare us for a relationship with our Savior. And I realized a minute ago, I said I'm going to connect it to education, and I forgot to do that. When you were talking about, Josh, we're already cyborgs, and the different ways that we're already formed into the values and the behaviors and the patterns of machine. That is explicitly how public education was structured as it was developed at the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century. That as public education grew, they were looking to Prussia, German military schools, intentionally thinking about how can we structure this mass industrial public educational system so as to form people to be workers, right? Cogs in the industrial profit machine. And so the forming, what we I grew up in public education. I just assumed this was normal. When the bell rings, we move, we get into lines. We have classrooms of 33 people because that's an efficient way to educate a lot of people. We have tests, standardized certain tests, because that's an efficient way to test if there's information input for. So many of those structures of the public school education are actually formed through the worldview of the techno-industrial machine. And that's why right now Christians are having such a struggle to figure out, wait a second, the educational formation our kids are receiving from the state is moving them into different values, different ways of being that are antithetical or at war with the values and the worldview and the story that I'm trying to build in the home and in the church. And is why I'm a fan of homeschooling. Is the easiest way to do that is just unplug from the machine, bring them into a home or a co-op or a private school where you can structure the forms of education in more humane incarnational values. Not everyone can do that, and that's wherever you are, there's ways to make it better. But it is where I think part of why we're seeing such a movement toward alternative forms of education. People don't realize that the public school was very explicitly, intentionally structured according to cyborg values, if we want to put it that way.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Josh.
and now, not only is it sort of the factory model, right? Now we have it's all mediated through the screen, right? And the ability then to not even necessarily teach, but just give students tests and assignments through Google Classroom and so forth. That was another thing I saw the last few years in the school, especially during COVID, was just how much more of education was being mediated through the screen, even in-person education, right? Every student had a Chromebook and so forth. It was becoming inhumane, right? Again, not that those devices are bad. You can use them as a tool for certain tasks, and we did that, but we didn't have them out every day in my room. We still use pen and paper and so forth. Yeah, so that's, I think, a big place where this sort of technological question is really felt right now, is in the realm of education. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, that is so good. And it's good for parents to hear it too, because if the public education system is rethinking technology in the classroom in some way, like through devices, the phones, then that should tell us something. If they're seeing an issue with it, we should be seeing it. I don't think that the secular culture should be ahead of Christians in, in learning how to seeing the problem, because they're going to have a different solution to it because of their worldview. We might all see a problem with it, but how they handle the problem is not going to be the same as we do. And so I think we should also be like you said, you can hold up your book and you can hold up the other book written by Haidt and say, which one would you rather be reading as a Christian? We both see the problem, but we're going to be giving the answers to you from a biblical worldview that is going to take you on a more effective journey on how to navigate this culture. And there's something to be said about that. And so my final question, and I've had a lot, and I'm sorry that I've kept you guys here for this long, but it's really interesting. My final question is Chat GPT. Okay. I get all the time told with all the writing that I do, oh, you should go and Chat GPT and get it to get you going on a starting sentence or whatever. And I have refused to use it because I just am like, I'm going to try to be creative and think of it myself. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, I don't use it.
Mm.
I think, this is an example where we need to think carefully about the development of our human faculties and the atrophy of those things. It might be easier, right, to get an idea from ChatGPT or have it summarize a book for me or have it write something for me. But what am I losing out in the process? And I think the big concern for me is that the more we outsource things to AI, where does that leave us as people? What type of people are we being formed into or not being formed into if we continually outsource more and more to AI? There's something to be said for the hours and hours of time that it takes to learn how to play the piano or to learn how to paint, right? That then allows you to produce the art or produce the music or produce the paper, right? And part of that strain, part of that challenge, part of that friction and resistance that occurs during that process actually develops me into a certain type of person, develops me into a virtuous person, perhaps, or at least can help move in that direction. And so if we outsource all of those, challenges and strains and difficulties to the machine, then are we going to develop into the type of people that can play Bach rather than just push a button to play Bach, right? That can actually make a painting rather than just, outsource it to AI art? Can we actually articulate and communicate in meaningful ways, or can we just push a button to do so? I'm not saying there's no place for the use of AI. I think there are valid uses of it. But I think we do need to be asking those serious questions, especially in relation to education and children, when it comes to the development of human faculties and how we ourselves are being formed into certain type of people.
Yeah, so I use ChatGPT a little bit. So I'll offer the maybe more loose perspective on this. I totally agree in terms of educational formation that students need to be learning language formation and writing and speaking skills for themselves. And, Shonda, you mentioned that Jordan Peterson has really emphasized this. And Christians can explain why, because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and it's through the Word that the world was made, right? In Genesis, God spoke, and the world came into being. So there's something deeply profound about language that is at the center of who we are as image bearers of the Creator, who brings things into existence through language, right? So language is so powerful and so central to who we are that we ought to take no shortcuts on the language formation of our children. And, and this is why in the classical model, you got two main parts of education, the trivium and the quadrivium, language and number. That God really creates the world through word and number. We see these mathematical patterns in creation. Those are the two languages in which the world is written. And so our literacy in terms of word and number is essential to being human. And so we need to have no quarter, good firm boundaries on AI, Grammarly, anything that's going to replace, usurp, atrophy language formation in our children and ourselves. Now, that said, in terms of how I use ChatGPT is, again, to Josh, what you're saying, as a specific tool. Well, I have a goal, a creative goal for myself that I'm going to use the right tool for. So how I use it is, a lot of academics have research assistants. I don't. I'm an independent academic, living on the edge and the margin, run on a low budget. So I use ChatGPT the way I would use like a research assistant. Can you summarize that book? Or I asked it the other day to tell me the most important texts of Islamic culture during the Middle Ages. Now I know that it's not always right. So I need to know how it works, what its limitations are, what its temptations are. Knowing that, then I feel like I can use it fairly well. I'm going to use it for kind of summarizing work or listing work that's kind of research assistant work. But then I'm going to go and then I'll use that list to decide, well, which books do I want to go look at myself? Or I'll ask it for a summary of a book to decide if that book's going to be worth my time to read myself. That kind of work, I've actually found it to be pretty useful for, and that's just kind of advanced database work in a sense. So I would say, as long as you recognize its limits and its temptations, it can be a helpful research tool in that way. But I try to avoid asking it any creative work. I mean, one, because to know all it's doing is amalgamizing the generic sum of what's said. So if I want to be a good speaker and a good teacher, that's creative work that's going to come from my own agency and soul. I want to put something in my soul. Anybody can just go read generic stuff. I'm not going to be serving myself as a speaker, a teacher, or a writer by offering generic blah that anyone could find online. I need to continue to make sure I fine tune the skills of speaking with, creative, personal depth. So, but as a research assistant, so far I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to say more than just yes or no, right? And we have a chapter of this in the book where we try to offer sort of a nuanced position. A yes or no answer isn't going to be very conducive to long-term human flourishing in the AI age, I don't think. We need to understand how it works. That's really important. So we understand what it's good at and what it's not good at. What a large language model is and how such a thing works, right? We need to understand that they also have biases, right? They're not objective in any sense of the term. And also they're being trained on the massive amounts of information that's online, which includes good information and bad information and everything in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important, I think, in relation to education, ChatGPT and other forms of AI could be an object of inquiry. This is a Neil Postman term when it comes to technology. He says, in relation to the computer, that students should be more interested not in getting information from the computer, asking questions to it, but asking questions about it, right? How does this thing work? What is it doing to me? What is it doing to how I think of other people, right? So it should, I think, be brought into education as an object of inquiry so that we understand how it works. But when it comes to, our development of human faculties, I do think we need to think carefully about that. I do think there's a place also for large language models in certain professions, especially in the realm of writing code and things like that. I think AI, again, there's uses for it when it's properly limited more as a tool rather than viewing it as some conscious being or something like that. And again, we tend to humanize our technologies, and that's an example of that. So yeah, there's a nuanced position there for sure. you know, in the realm of education, I've had an article coming out about this in an education journal about making, you know, encouraging schools to develop policies about AI. We need to get out in front of this because students are experimenting with it left and right at all levels. Just was talking to a seminary professor the other day, and there were seminary students that were using it to write papers. So this is affecting high schools, this is affecting colleges, this is affecting seminaries. We've got to think carefully about it, get out in front of it, and be prepared for sure.
Yeah, I have a zero chat GPT policy in my classes. Use it once, you get a 0 on the assignment and a warning. Use it twice, you're removed from the class.
How are
Because
you checking for that?
I use zero chat GPT, and it's so far been pretty accurate. And I think if you know this is a whole conversation of how teachers should deal with this, but I really just want to say a zero tolerance policy is important. And an analogy I think is helpful is, let's say you want to get in physical shape. If I just have a robot lift my weights for me, is that doing anything to get me in shape and to advance? No, it's pointless. It's totally pointless. And so having ChatGPT, teachers are not interested in reading another paper. Nobody needs more information out there. The whole point of a writing assignment is to train you to think. And if you offload that process to a computer, it completely has lost the whole point of education. So I think it's real important to have a zero tolerance. And so far, I've had 100% accuracy in determining anytime a student has used it, that you can trust your intuition. Something's off, right?
Yeah.
And if you're actually interacting with your students so that you have kind of got a sense of their verbal patterns and what they actually know and don't know, you can pretty reliably intuit something's not right. I run it through zero chat GPT. It's usually like, 98, 80% AI generated. And I think it's an act of love to students to have a hard boundary. Just don't even go there. Don't drunk. Don't, just don't go there, because it's language formation is such an essential part of our education.
I feel like also if you're a teacher in the classroom and if you were maybe thinking about a writing assignment or something like that, if you have your kids you put a topic on the board and you have them write pen and paper, which would be a pain to them because they're gonna be like, oh, I can't type it. But then you get to hear like almost their voice, their personality, and you do that a couple of times and then you keep that and then measure it up against a typed, research paper or something, which I know will be a little bit more formal than just a free write, but you can still kind of get a grasp for, okay, this is completely off or completely different. Like you said, you have to build a relationship with those kids too, to kind of be able to tune into what it is they're giving you and if that's truly their work and their ideas.
Yeah. And maybe we need to do more. I was talking to a friend who's at Regent's Classical School here. Do more single paragraph written assignments, do more 1 to 2 page papers, do shorter assignments so that we aren't tempting them. If you only do 1 big paper per semester, they're not practicing the language formation. You're not getting used to their voice. And then the temptation level is going to be high when faced with a big project. So I think more shorter assignments is going to be a lot more effective way to go.
Yeah. And I think shorter assignments also lets them, because even social media is built for, how do I condense this message? Because of the attention span and the amount of space that you have. But if you can condense the message and the points and you're making the points, then I feel like it's almost like, okay, I can see that they know it. And then if you want them to expand on it later, I mean, now our teacher brains are collaborating, right? And that's kind of, that's what teachers will do. But it's a very interesting way to think about how also to navigate that lure of Chat GPT to think for me and to kind of do my work for me. Whereas you're encouraging them with little bits at a time to get that information out and own it. This is yours. You own this. And, I think sometimes when a kid has a finished product, 1, they realize they can do it. And 2, it's something to be proud of because they did do it. but
Yes.
Right. And there's older methods of assessment that we can return to as well that,
yeah.
are AI proof in a certain sense, right? The good old fashioned oral exam,
Yes.
systematic discussions, in class writing with pen and paper, right? There's ways to really, avoid that AI temptation. But at the same time, if we only do those types of assignments, then we're allowing AI to sort of foreclose and shrink the window of education and sort of like an AI arms race, right?
Mhm.
And we don't want to create that sort of animosity or antagonism between the teacher and the student. There's a level of trust and relationship that has to be there, and that's where I like what you were saying, Annie. Like you're just frank with them, right? Hey, we don't use this because we don't want to be formed in that way. Why would I have my robot lift weights for me? I'm not getting the benefit, right? So talking about it openly and really, I think, encouraging students to just um, uh, avoid using it for those sort of deformational things that occur. And then also having some of those other types of assignments that are maybe more old fashioned, if you will, where AI isn't even possible to use. I think, a balance of those things would be good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
good point. And for the parents listening, if you're not a teacher, this is still applicable to you with your kids, and even for us as, individuals when we're having to do a work assignment, or if we're, trying to create, or even if you don't write often, to maybe start thinking about doing that and not relying on technology so much, where you can do it, where you can be creative in yourself. So I don't want people to think this is just only for the teachers. It's not. It's for all of us, because we're all in this together. We're all having to utilize these forms of technology, and they're shaping all of us if we let them. So we need to know how to navigate them. So this was so good, such a great conversation. Where can we find and follow you both? I don't know if you have social media. If you do, please tell us. And then Josh, where can we find the book?
Well, if you want to follow me, you'll have to get in line, walk behind me in person, I guess. I recently got rid of Facebook and Instagram. I did have those things for my woodworking business, but I was honestly, just being honest, I was just spending too much time on them.
Yeah.
So I got rid of them. I do have a YouTube channel for my woodworking business, but that's really separate from my intellectual work. I write for Salvo. I'm a contributing editor there. If you Google me, you can find the various places I write for. The book is available on Amazon. It's called Are We All Cyborgs Now? Reclaiming Our Humanity from the Machine. You can find it on Amazon. And like I said, if you Google me, you'll find, my articles at various places. But I don't have like a central, uh, you know, social media presence. That's
Okay.
just for my own sanity.
We'll go ahead and link the everything, or where they can find you in your book, in the show notes. And then Annie, where can we find you if you're on social media or not, or just places where you write?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website, anniecrawford.net, and find articles there and talks and different podcasts. And but I am still trying to figure out how to use social media well. So you can find me on Twitter at Annie L. Crawford. That's probably where I'm most active. And also Facebook at Annie Brownell Crawford. I haven't figured out how to use Instagram well, other than to keep an eye on my kids. So I don't do much over there.
Okay, well, no problem. I'll go ahead and wherever I can, like, I know Salvo for you, Josh, too. And then Annie, I'll go ahead and link your website for people who are wanting to find you guys and get more information. You'll be able to find it there. Go pick up the book, Are We All Cyborgs Now, by Josh Pauling. Who is your co-author, Josh? I forgot the name.
Yeah, Robin Phillips, good friend, both of Annie and I, and great guy. He writes for Salvo and a variety of magazines as well. But yeah, we actually got in touch through sort of the publishing world. We were writing about the same topics and wanted to collaborate on this, and it was fun. It was fun working with him.
That's awesome. Yes. So you guys go to the show notes, click the links. You'll be able to link up with Josh and Annie. If you have any questions for me, you can email me at hello@shandafulbright.com, and I'll catch you on the next one.